So during the years 2016 to 2017, I very briefly attended the School of Musicians Institute in Hollywood, hence the shirt I'm wearing. While I was there, they taught me a lot about guitar, scales, chords, music theory, and all that stuff, of course. But they also taught me a lot about how people approach guitar in most, if not all, types of contemporary music. And one specific approach that I was really interested in at the time was jazz music.
Jazz.
Now, the main thing that really drew me to that type of music was, I think, the improvisational aspect of it. Being a primarily rock guitarist at the time, and even right now to a certain degree, I was used to just having to rehearse with the band and basically play all the same licks, all the same melodies, the same exact way every single time. And even at the gig, you play everything the same exact way that you rehearsed it. So I was used to doing that kind of thing and not improvising at all. So seeing these jazz musicians, it just blew my mind how they could just walk up on stage with no prepared solo whatsoever and just nail it as if they had been rehearsing that for years. So of course I wanted to learn how to do that. And so the first private instructor I had was a jazz guitarist by the name of Josh Workman, who is a very talented guitarist from LA, so if you want to check him out. And basically the first tune he gave me to try to solo on was Fly Me to the Moon, which is a relatively easy jazz song to start with. And so basically I looked at the sheet music and I figured, oh, all the chords basically exist within the key of A minor, so as long as I play anything in A minor, it should sound right? So the first time I tried soloing over a jazz piece, it probably sounded something like this. And the first thing I realized while I was playing was, wow, this doesn't sound very good. That's pretty much what I've done in rock music, just figure out what all the chords are in the key of and then just play in that key nonstop and you'll sound good, right? And from there, that's kind of when I realized that in order to learn this style of music, I had to pretty much relearn a lot of the guitar and just approach it in a completely different way. The reason I'm saying this is because once I was really able to understand how a basic jazz soloing works, I was able to apply that to all of my other music and my other playing. And because of that, not only was it able to help me come up with way more melodic lines over simple, functional kind of harmony, but it also helped me come up with good melodic ideas over kind of odd chord progressions that I would make up that were kind of non-functional or didn't function the same way that normal chord progressions worked. And that's where the topic of this video comes in. I wanted to show you some of the basics of jazz improvisation, and then I wanted to show you how to apply that over some odd chord progressions that maybe you've made up but have a hard time coming up with melodic ideas over. So while I was at MI, I was also taught by another amazing guitar player, and for anyone who's actually been to MI, you probably know exactly who this is, by the name of Dan Gilbert. Now Dan taught us 3 basic ways to approach improvising, and there's probably really multiple other ways to approach it, but these are just the 3 that we were given. And he would refer to these 3 approaches as key center, chord scale, and chord tone. Now, key center refers to where you have a chord progression that's mostly diatonic or completely diatonic, and you just play through the entire chord progression in one scale. And that's pretty much the approach I usually did when I was playing only rock music. Now, the second way is chord scale, which is more of a jazz fusion kind of technique where you take each individual chord and you play different scales or different modes over each chord, which I'm not going to go in depth with today, but if you want me to make a video on that in the future, I would be glad to. And then the last one, which I'm going to talk about today, is how most old school jazz players play, which is they play around the chords or the chord tones. And that was really the main problem with my playing when I was trying to play over Fly Me to the Moon. I was completely ignoring the chord tones and just trying to play something that sounded cool in the key of A minor, which didn't fit the progression at all. So first of all, we need some chords. So what I'm going to do is just take the song All the Things You Are, which is a really common jazz standard, and just take the first part probably up until the first key change into C major. So this tune is mostly in the key of A flat major, and the chords are F minor to B flat minor to E flat 7 to A flat major to D flat major, and then G7, which brings us to C major 7. So the first thing I was told to do to get used to jazz improvising is to basically just play the arpeggios of those chords, or just arpeggiate those chords. And by arpeggiate, that of course means just play all the notes individually. So that's all I did there, is I just played the arpeggios of those chords I just played. So F minor 7, so B flat minor 7, to E flat 7, and etc. Now, of course, this isn't how you're supposed to sound when you solo, but this is just an exercise to make sure that you know where all the chord tones are. Because when jazz players solo over this song, they're still thinking about being in the key of A flat major. The only difference is they're also focusing on landing on those chord tones. So this exercise is really just meant to make you memorize those chord tones. And of course, it's also really helpful to be able to play everything in the same positions. So if I started in this position, so once you get comfortable doing that on multiple different areas of the guitar, you can start adding in some of the other scale tones or even some chromatic tones to make it sound more interesting. So for example, you could do something like... And now that's not anything super special, but that's a perfectly acceptable jazz line right there. So the reason why jazz players play around each chord like that is so that you can hear the chord progression while they're soloing. And if you're listening to a good soloist, you should be able to hear the chord progression just through the solo itself, even if there's nobody playing the chords behind them at all. So now we have that down, but what if we tried applying that technique to a more interesting chord progression, something that's not really diatonic at all? Now, instead of making one up, I actually found a really interesting chord progression from a Tyler, the Creator song. So interestingly, this part is mainly just made up of minor 9 chords. It starts on an E flat minor 9, and then it moves up to A flat minor 9. Which that right there is not really that weird of a chord movement. It's just moving up by a fourth, and both chords actually exist within the key of E flat minor. So in that case, you could just play E flat minor over both chords. But after that, it plays an A minor 9 chord. And that's when it starts to get odd, because that chord does not exist within E flat minor, nor does it really make sense to go to that chord. And then from there, it returns back to E flat minor 9 to A flat minor 9 again. But from here it goes to F sharp minor 9, and then moves up to A minor 9. And then the last part, it goes back down to E flat minor 9. And then it goes to the one chord that's not a minor 9. It's D7 or D9, D dominant 9. And then it goes back to E flat minor 9. And then the last chord, it just goes down to D flat minor 9. So as you can see, it's very non-functional. It's not 100% diatonic, so it might be kind of strange trying to come up with some kind of melody over it, but maybe it'll be easier if we use this jazz technique. So basically, I'm just going to do the same thing where I'm playing nothing but the arpeggios, but I'm also going to simplify it to just minor 7th arpeggios instead of minor 9 arpeggios, at least at first. So again, that gives me a sense of where all the arpeggios are kind of within that same area. And again, when you're actually soloing over a piece, you don't want to just play nothing but arpeggios the entire time. This is solely meant to be an exercise for practice. Because once you keep doing this over time, eventually you'll just know where all the arpeggios are on the neck. So someone could just say, oh, play a D minor 7 arpeggio, and you could play it just anywhere. So that's how I went about learning how to improvise over jazz, and I've applied it to a lot of my other playing for my rock stuff and my progressive metal stuff as well, and it's become really helpful for helping me create really melodic lines. So I think in the long run, it does take a long time to get used to playing those arpeggios all over the place, but once you learn it, it's super helpful to make your playing more melodic. But anyway, that's all the time I have today. I hope you enjoyed. Please like, subscribe, comment, let me know what you thought of the video, or give me any suggestions for other topics you want me to cover, and I will catch you all later.